The community theater of Pine Creek had seen better days. The walls needed a fresh coat of paint, and some of the seats in the back row were held together with duct tape, but to Lily it was a second home. As the director of the upcoming production, she paced back and forth across the worn wooden stage, phone pressed to her ear. "What do you mean you can't do it anymore?" she asked, her voice echoing in the empty theater. The lead actor had just quit 2 weeks before opening night. Something about a job opportunity in another state. Lily thanked him for the heads up, hung up, and let out a long sigh. She sank into one of the front row seats and stared at the empty stage. Finding a replacement would be nearly impossible. Everyone in town who could act was already in the show, and bringing in someone new this late would be a nightmare. The thought of canceling made her stomach turn. Later that evening, Lily met her friends at Joe's Diner, their usual Friday spot. The jukebox played old country songs while they shared a large plate of fries. Lily hadn't stopped thinking about her problem. "I just don't know what to do," she said, stirring her milkshake with a straw. "We've been working on this show for months." Her friend Drew suggested posting on social media, while Becky mentioned her cousin who had acted in high school. None of the options seemed promising. Then Lily noticed him. Sitting quietly at the corner booth was Robert, her co-worker from the insurance office. He was hunched over paperwork, probably bringing his job to dinner as usual. Robert was the definition of ordinary, always in the same brown sweater, always with the same neat haircut, always saying just enough to be polite, but never enough to be remembered. Something clicked in Lily's mind. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the second milkshake. Whatever it was, she stood up suddenly. "I'll be right back," she told her friends, who watched curiously as she walked over to Robert's table. "Hey there," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. Robert looked up, surprised. They were work acquaintances at best. He nodded politely. "Hi." "So," Lally said, diving right in, "I have a bit of a situation. Our lead actor just quit the community play, and we open in 2 weeks." Robert nodded again, clearly unsure why she was telling him this. "And I thought, maybe you could do it." His eyes widened. He set down his pen. "Me? Act? I've never." "That's what would make it perfect," Lily pressed on, warming to her idea. "It's not a huge role, just a few scenes. You'd mostly have to look surprised and say a few lines." Robert was already shaking his head. "I'm not an actor. I do paperwork." He gestured to the forms in front of him. By now, Lily's friends had joined them, curious about what was happening. When they heard Lily's suggestion, they joined in. "Come on, it would be fun. Live a little. What's the worst that could happen?" Robert looked increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. Lily could see she had made a mistake. She was about to apologize when Drew took things too far. "Bet you can't do it," he said with a laugh. "Bet you'd freeze up the minute the lights hit you." Something shifted in Robert's expression. It was subtle. A slight tightening around his eyes, a barely noticeable straightening of his shoulders. "I don't need to prove anything," he said quietly. "Of course not," Lally said quickly, shooting Drew a look. "Forget I mentioned it. It was just a wild idea." Everyone started to drift back to their table when Robert spoke again. "What's the play about?" Lally turned back, surprised. "It's about a man who discovers his voice after being silent his whole life." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. For a moment, they just looked at each other. "When's the first rehearsal?" Robert asked finally. "You're not serious," Lily said, but there was hope in her voice. Robert shrugged, trying to seem casual though his hands trembled slightly as he gathered his papers. "Maybe it's time I tried something new." Lily couldn't believe it. As they exchanged numbers and arranged details, she fought to keep a straight face. This quiet, forgettable man on a stage. It would be a disaster, but at least they'd have someone. And maybe, just maybe, they'd all get a good laugh out of it. Little did she know what she had just set in motion. The first rehearsal was exactly as bad as everyone expected. Robert showed up 15 minutes early, script already dog-eared from reading it overnight. He stood awkwardly in the corner of the community center, nodding politely when introduced to the other cast members. "All right, places everyone," Lily called out, clapping her hands. The energy in the room instantly shifted as the actors moved to their positions. Everyone except Robert, who remained frozen where he stood. "That includes you," Lily said gently, gesturing to the marked X on the floor. Right, Robert mumbled, shuffling to his spot. His face had gone pale. What followed was painful to watch. Robert's voice came out as barely a whisper. He kept his eyes glued to the script, even for the simplest lines. When asked to move across the stage, he walked like a robot, arms stiff at his sides. Maybe try it with a bit more feeling, Lily suggested after his third attempt at a simple scene. Robert nodded, took a deep breath, and tried again. Somehow, it was worse. By the end of the night, Lily caught the looks her cast was giving each other. This had been a terrible mistake. She had put their hard work at risk for what? A joke that wasn't even funny. Same time tomorrow, she announced, trying to sound cheerful. As everyone gathered their things, she approached Robert, who was already putting on his coat. Thanks for coming, she said, not quite meeting his eyes. It was bad, wasn't it? He asked quietly. Lily wanted to lie, but something in his expression stopped her. It's just the first day, she offered instead. Robert nodded, though they both knew what that meant. The next few rehearsals followed the same pattern. Robert was stiff, awkward, and clearly uncomfortable. The cast grew increasingly frustrated, though they tried to hide it. Lily began to think about alternatives, maybe calling the original actor to beg him to come back. On Thursday night, rehearsal ended early when one of the actresses got sick. Lily was gathering her notes when she realized Robert hadn't left with everyone else. You don't have to stay, she said, thinking he wanted to talk about quitting. Part of her hoped he would. I just wanted to practice a bit more, he said, his voice so low she almost didn't hear him. If that's okay. Sure, Lily shrugged. Lock up when you're done. The key's behind the front desk. Robert nodded and Lily left, too tired to think much of it. She was halfway to her car when she realized she'd forgotten her phone. Turning back, she quietly opened the door to the community center. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. Robert was on stage, alone under the single light that had been left on. He wasn't just reciting lines, he was performing them. His voice, usually so quiet and hesitant, filled the empty room. His body, normally rigid with anxiety, moved with grace and purpose. When he delivered the monologue about feeling invisible, there was raw emotion in his voice that gave Lily goosebumps. This wasn't the same person who had stumbled through rehearsal hours earlier. This was someone with talent, real talent. Lily backed away slowly, not wanting him to know she had seen. Outside, she leaned against the wall, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why was he holding back during rehearsals? What was different when he thought no one was watching? The next day, she arrived at the community center an hour before anyone else was scheduled to show up. Robert's car was already in the parking lot. Through the window, she could see him practicing alone again, moving with the same confidence she had witnessed the night before. Taking a deep breath, Lily pushed open the door. The sound made Robert jump, and instantly he was back to his awkward self. Don't stop, she said quickly. Please. Robert stared at her, caught like a deer in headlights. I saw you last night, Lily admitted, when you were alone. His face flushed red. I was just messing around. No, Lily shook her head, walking toward the stage. That wasn't messing around. That was acting, real acting. She paused at the edge of the stage, looking up at him. Why do you hide it when others are around? Robert looked down at his shoes, the script crumpled in his hand. I don't know how to be that person when people are watching, he said finally. Lily climbed the steps to the stage, a new idea forming in her mind. Then let's figure it out together. The community center was quiet on Saturday morning. Lily had called Robert the night before, suggesting they meet before the weekend group rehearsal. Now they sat face to face on the edge of the stage, legs dangling over the side. So Lily began, tell me what happens when other people show up. What changes? Robert picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. I start thinking about how they're seeing me, judging me. Then my throat gets tight, my hands shake, and my mind goes blank. He gave a small, embarrassed laugh. Pretty pathetic, huh? Not pathetic, Lily said. Normal. Everyone gets stage fright. Not like this, Robert said. And definitely not the other actors. You'd be surprised, Lily replied. Tom throws up before every performance. Paula used to faint during auditions. They just learned how to work through it. Robert looked up, surprised. Really? Lily nodded. acting isn't about not being scared. It's about using that fear, turning it into something else. She hopped off the stage and walked a few steps back, looking at him. Let's try something. Pretend I'm not here. What? Close your eyes. Imagine you're alone, like you were last night. Robert hesitated, then closed his eyes. Lily watched as his shoulders remained tense, his hands gripping the edge of the stage. Now say your first line, she instructed softly. He cleared his throat. I've spent my entire life being careful, he began, his voice barely audible. I can't hear you, Lily said. Robert sighed, opening his eyes. This isn't working. Try again, Lily insisted. But this time, don't think about saying the lines right. Think about why your character is saying them. Robert looked skeptical but closed his eyes again. Lily watched as he took several deep breaths. What's your character feeling in this scene? She asked. Frustrated, Robert answered without hesitation. Tired of being invisible. Have you ever felt invisible? A small smile played at Robert's lips. Every day of my life. Then that's what you use, Lily said. Don't pretend to be someone else feeling frustrated. Be you feeling frustrated, just with different words. Robert nodded, eyes still closed. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Not louder, exactly, but fuller somehow, more present. I've spent my entire life being careful, he said, and this time Lily felt a chill run down her spine, watching from corners, speaking when spoken to, taking up as little space as possible. He opened his eyes, but he wasn't looking at Lily anymore. He was looking through her, past her, his gaze fixed on something only he could see. And what has it gotten me? He continued, rising to his feet. A life so small I can barely breathe in it. The words hung in the air between them. Lily stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had come over him. Finally, she whispered, That was it. That's what I saw when you were alone. Robert blinked, coming back to himself. A flush crept up his neck. Was it okay? Okay? Lily laughed. It was incredible. They spent the next 2 hours working through different scenes. Sometimes Robert would slip back into his nervous self, but Lily learned to recognize the signs. The stiffening of his shoulders, the flattening of his voice, and guide him back to that place of truth. By the time the rest of the cast arrived, they had developed a system. When Robert felt himself freezing up, he would focus on Lily standing in the back of the room, and she would give him a tiny nod, their secret signal that he should find the real feeling behind the words. The difference was immediate. While not perfect, Robert made it through the full rehearsal without once reducing his voice to a whisper or stumbling to a complete stop. The other actors noticed, exchanging surprised glances when he delivered his big monologue with actual emotion. What happened to Office Guy? Tom whispered to Paula during a break. No idea, she replied, watching as Lily and Robert huddled in the corner, discussing the next scene. But something's definitely changed. Over the next week, Robert improved dramatically. The cast, initially skeptical, began treating him as one of their own. He was invited to after-rehearsal dinners and included in the group chat. For perhaps the first time in his life, Robert was being seen. One evening, after a particularly good rehearsal, Lily found him sitting alone on the front steps of the community center, staring up at the stars. Penny for your thoughts? She asked, sitting beside him. Robert smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes. I was just thinking about how different things feel now. A few weeks ago, the thought of standing on stage would have given me nightmares. And now? Now I can't wait. He turned to her, his expression serious. Thank you for seeing something in me I didn't know was there. Lily felt a strange flutter in her chest. I didn't put anything there. I just helped you find it. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Lily realized something had shifted between them too. What had started as a joke had become something neither of them had expected. She wasn't quite sure what to call it yet, but she knew one thing for certain. Robert wasn't just playing a role anymore. He was becoming who he was always meant to be. The smell of fresh paint filled the community center as volunteers touched up the stage set. Only 10 days remained until opening night, and the atmosphere had shifted from casual to focused. Robert arrived early as usual, carrying 2 coffee cups. Thought you might need this, he said, handing one to Lily, who was squinting at her director's notes. "You're a lifesaver," she said, taking a grateful sip. "I was up half the night worrying about the lighting cues." Robert had changed in subtle ways over the past week. He stood straighter. He made eye contact more often. He even cracked jokes sometimes. The quiet insurance man was still there, but something new was emerging alongside him. "Want to run lines before everyone gets here?" he asked. Before Lily could answer, the door swung open with a bang. A tall man strode in, his confident walk and perfectly styled hair immediately drawing attention. "Guess who's back?" he announced to the nearly empty room. Lily froze, coffee cup halfway to her mouth. "Greg?" Greg Thompson, the theater group's usual leading man, approached with arms outstretched. "The big project wrapped early. I can step back into the show after all." He looked around, noticing the half-finished set. "Looks like I made it just in time to save the day." Robert stood quietly to the side, his face carefully blank. Lily glanced between the two men, a knot forming in her stomach. "That's unexpected," she managed to say. "But we've already replaced you. Robert here has been working really hard on the role." Greg looked Robert up and down, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "This guy, really?" He chuckled. "No offense, buddy, but this is a pretty demanding part." "He's doing great, actually," Lily said firmly. "I'm sure he is," Greg said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "For an amateur. But the show deserves the best, right? The whole town's coming." By now, other cast members were arriving, their excited greetings to Greg filling the space. Many had worked with him for years and were clearly thrilled to see him back. "Greg, no way. We missed you. The show won't be the same without you." Lily watched Robert's shoulders inch closer to his ears with each enthusiastic welcome. The confidence he built over the past weeks seemed to be evaporating before her eyes. "We need to talk about this," she told Greg quietly. "It's not that simple." "What's to talk about?" Greg said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm back, problem solved. Our office friend here can help with the tech crew or something." Several people laughed, and Robert slipped away toward the back of the room. Lily wanted to follow him, but the cast had circled around her and Greg, full of questions about what would happen next. "Let's take 5, she announced, extricating herself from the group. She found Robert in the small dressing room, packing his script into his bag. "Don't," she said from the doorway. Robert didn't look up. "It's fine. This makes sense." "No, it doesn't." Lily stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "You earned that role. Greg quit on us." "But he's back now," Robert said with a shrug that tried too hard to be casual. "And everyone's happy about it." "I'm not," Lily said. Robert finally looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "Why not? He's obviously better than me. More experienced. Probably doesn't need a secret signal to remember how to speak on stage." "That's not fair," Lily said. "What you've accomplished in 2 weeks is incredible. Most people take years to develop the kind of emotional honesty you bring to that role." Robert zipped up his bag. "Doesn't matter now." "It matters to me," Lily insisted, moving to block the door. "And it should matter to you too. Don't throw away everything you've worked for." "Worked for?" Robert gave a bitter laugh. "Let's be honest. This whole thing started as a joke. You needed someone last minute, and I was the punchline." The truth of his words hit Lily like a slap. "Maybe at first," she admitted, "but not anymore." Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and sighed. "My boss needs me back at the office. Apparently, insurance claims don't file themselves." "Robert, please. It's okay, really," he said, his voice softening. "These past couple weeks have been different. Good different. But let's not pretend I'm something I'm not." He gently moved past her and out the door, leaving Lily alone with the hollow feeling that she'd just lost something important. Back in the main room, Greg was entertaining the cast with stories from his project. His voice filled the space the way it always had, loud, confident, and familiar. On paper, getting him back was the obvious win, the practical choice. So why did it feel so wrong? That evening, after a strange rehearsal where Greg read from the script while constantly suggesting improvements, Lily sat alone in her car. She pulled out her phone and stared at Robert's contact information. Her thumb hovered over the call button. What would she even say? That she'd turned his life upside down for a role she might not be able to give him anymore? that watching him find his voice had somehow become the best part of her day. Instead, she drove to the small apartment complex on the edge of town where Robert lived. She had dropped him off once after rehearsal during a rainstorm. Sitting in the parking lot, she noticed a light on in what she thought was his window. She was about to get out when her phone rang. It was the theater owner. "Just heard the news about Greg," he said without preamble. "Great timing, huh? Ticket sales will go through the roof once word gets out." Lily closed her eyes. Yeah, great timing. Robert didn't show up to rehearsal the next day, or the day after that. When Lily called, the calls went straight to voicemail. When she texted, the responses were short and polite. "Sorry, working late," or "can't make it tonight." Greg slipped back into the role as if he'd never left, though he complained about the strange changes made to his character. The rest of the cast adjusted quickly, falling into old patterns. Only Lily seemed bothered by Robert's absence. "Has anyone heard from Robert?" she asked during a water break on the third day. Most people shrugged or shook their heads. Tom, who played the father, spoke up. "I saw him at the coffee shop yesterday. Seemed like regular old Robert again. Quiet, keeping to himself." "Regular old Robert," Lily repeated softly, feeling a surprising pang of loss. The Robert who had started to emerge these past weeks, the one with the expressive eyes and surprising depth, was retreating back into his shell. After rehearsal, Greg caught up with Lily as she was gathering her things. "The show's coming together nicely," he said, leaning against the wall with easy confidence. "Though I've been meaning to ask about that big monologue in Act 2. I was thinking we could cut it down a bit. It's a little intense." That monologue, the one where Robert had first shown his true ability. The one that gave Lily goosebumps every time. "The monologue stays as is," she said firmly. Greg raised his eyebrows. "Just a suggestion. Anyway, a bunch of us are heading to Pete's for drinks. You coming?" "Not tonight." Instead, Lily drove to the insurance office where Robert worked. It was after 7, but light still spilled from the windows. Through the glass, she could see him alone at his desk, surrounded by stacks of paper, looking exactly like the man she'd spotted in the diner weeks ago. She knocked on the glass door. Robert looked up, surprise crossing his face, before he schooled it back to polite neutrality. He came to unlock the door. "Working late?" Lily asked. "End of the quarter," he replied, gesturing vaguely at the paperwork. "Lots to catch up on." They stood awkwardly in the doorway until Robert stepped back. "Want to come in?" The office was quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Lily perched on the edge of a chair across from Robert's desk while he returned to his seat. "How's the show going?" he asked, straightening a stack of forms. "It's fine," Lily said, then sighed. "Actually, it's not. It's hollow." Robert looked up. "Greg's a good actor." "He is," Lily agreed. "Very polished. Very predictable." Robert's lips twitched slightly. Theater audiences like predictable. "Do they, though?" Lily leaned forward. "I think they like being surprised. Moved. Challenged." She paused. "I miss your interpretation." Robert looked down at his hands. "I appreciate that. But it's probably for the best. Opening night is in a week. Greg knows what he's doing. So did you." "I was just playing pretend," Robert said. "Playing at being someone I'm not." "That's not how it looked to me," Lily said. "It looked like you were finally being exactly who you are." Something flickered across Robert's face. Pain, maybe, or longing. "I heard something the other day," Lily continued. "A cast member said you seemed back to being regular old Robert again." She studied his face. "But I don't think that's true. I think once you found your voice, you can't unfind it. It's still there, even if you're trying to ignore it." Robert was silent for a long moment. "What do you want from me, Lily?" "I want you to come to tomorrow's rehearsal." He shook his head. "I don't have a part anymore." "Just come watch," Lily pressed. "That's all I'm asking." Robert looked like he wanted to refuse, but something in Lily's expression made him pause. Just to watch, he finally agreed. Lily left feeling like she'd won a small victory. But when rehearsal time came the next day, Robert was nowhere to be seen. They ran through the whole play, and he never appeared. Discouraged, Lily was the last to leave, turning off lights and locking up. As she crossed the parking lot, she spotted a familiar car in the shadows of the far corner. Robert was sitting inside, staring straight ahead. Lily approached slowly, giving him time to drive away if he wanted to. When he didn't, she tapped gently on the window. He rolled it down but didn't look at her. "You came," she said. "I came," he agreed. "But you didn't come in." Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I got as far as the door. Heard everyone laughing inside. Couldn't make myself open it." Lily's heart sank. They were just running lines. "Doesn't matter," Robert said. "Watching from the outside, that's who I am. Who I've always been." He finally looked at her, his eyes tired. These past weeks were a fluke. "They weren't," Lily insisted. "I saw you, Robert. Really saw you. Maybe you saw what you wanted to see." His voice was gentle, with no accusation in it. "A director's job is to find potential, to believe in people. That's what makes you good at what you do." "And what about you?" Lily asked. "What makes you good at what you do?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I'm thorough," he said after a moment. "Reliable." "That's not what I meant," Lily said. "What makes you come alive?" Robert didn't answer, but the question hung between them in the darkened car. "When you were on that stage," Lily said quietly, saying those lines about being invisible, about wanting more, that wasn't acting. That was truth. "Please stop," Robert whispered. "Why? Because it's easier to go back to being unseen? To being careful?" Robert's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "You don't understand what it's like. To spend your whole life being overlooked. To finally find something that makes you feel real, and then have it yanked away because someone better comes along." The raw emotion in his voice made Lily step back. This was the fire she'd glimpsed in his performance, real and untamed. "That's it," she said. "That's what I saw in you." Robert seemed to realize what had just happened. He closed his eyes, embarrassed. "I should go." "Wait," Lily said, an idea forming. "Come to the dress rehearsal tomorrow night. Not to watch, to perform." "Greg." "Greg won't be there," Lily said. "He has some award ceremony. He's missing the final rehearsal." She put her hand on the car door. "One last time. For yourself, no audience except me." Robert looked at her for a long moment. "Why does this matter so much to you?" Lily hadn't fully asked herself that question until now. "Because I think we all deserve the chance to be more than what others see in us," she finally said. "Even if it's just for one night." The community center was empty except for Lily when Robert pushed open the door the next evening. He was dressed in his work clothes, button-down shirt, plain tie, sensible shoes. His face gave nothing away. "You came," Lily said, trying not to sound too surprised. "I said I would." Robert glanced around the room. "So no one else is here. Just me." Lily gestured to the stage where a single chair sat under the lights. "I'll be your audience, your director, and your tech crew all rolled into one." Robert set his bag down, eyeing the stage with obvious apprehension. "I don't have the script anymore." "You don't need it," Lily replied. "You know every line." "I don't know if I can do this," Robert admitted. "It's been a week." Lily walked over to the lighting board and flipped a few switches, focusing the lights more tightly on the stage. "Remember what we talked about? Finding the truth behind the words." Robert nodded slowly. "So forget about the play for a minute," Lily suggested. "Just talk to me. Why did you agree to come tonight?" Robert hesitated, then sank into a seat in the front row. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I guess I wanted to know if it was real." "If what was real?" "That feeling. When I was up there," he gestured toward the stage. "When the words weren't just words anymore. When I wasn't just me anymore." He shook his head. "That probably sounds crazy." "It doesn't," Lily said, sitting beside him. "It sounds like someone who discovered something important." "But what's the point?" Robert asked. "The show opens in 5 days. Greg's the lead now. Nothing's going to change that." "Maybe it's not about the show," Lily said. "Maybe it's about you." Robert looked at her for a long moment. "You're not like anyone I've ever met, you know that?" "Is that a good thing?" "Definitely." A small smile played at his lips. "Incredibly annoying sometimes, but good." Lily laughed. "I'll take it." She nodded toward the stage. "So are you going to get up there, or did I set up those lights for nothing?" Robert hesitated, then stood. "No promises about how this is going to go." No expectations, Lily agreed. He climbed the steps to the stage, looking small under the bright lights. For a moment, he just stood there, hands at his sides. Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, something had shifted. "All my life," he began, his voice quiet but clear, "I've been the person no one notices." It was the opening of the monologue, not exactly as written in the script, but close enough. Lily sat perfectly still, afraid to break the spell. "I've made myself small," Robert continued, moving across the stage with growing confidence. Quiet, convenient, the perfect background character in everyone else's story. As he spoke, his voice gained strength, filling the empty theater. This wasn't just reciting lines. This was confession, revelation. The boundaries between Robert and the character blurred until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. By the time he reached the monologue's climax, tears glistened in his eyes. "But what if I'm tired of watching from the sidelines? What if just once I want to be the one who matters? The one who makes a difference? The one who is seen?" The last word echoed in the silent room. Robert stood frozen, breathing hard, looking almost surprised by what had just come out of him. Lily realized she was holding her breath. She exhaled slowly, her own eyes damp. That was... Before she could finish, the back door of the theater creaked open. They both turned to see Tom and Paula standing in the doorway, mouths open in astonishment. "Sorry," Tom said quickly. "We left some props earlier. We didn't mean to interrupt." "How long have you been standing there?" Lily asked. "Long enough," Paula replied, her eyes fixed on Robert. That was incredible. Robert shifted uncomfortably under their stares. "Thanks," he mumbled, starting to retreat back into his shell. "No, seriously," Tom insisted, walking further into the room. "I've seen this play performed professionally, and that was different. Better." More footsteps sounded at the door as two more cast members arrived, having carpooled with Tom and Paula. "What's going on?" one of them asked. Robert was just running through his monologue, Paula explained. His monologue. The newcomer looked confused. "But Greg's playing that part now." An awkward silence fell over the room. Robert moved to step off the stage, but Tom spoke up suddenly. "Can you do the scene with the father next? The one where you finally stand up to him?" He looked at Lily. "I know my part." Lily glanced at Robert, raising an eyebrow in question. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. As Tom joined him on stage, the other cast members quietly took seats in the audience. For the next hour, they worked through scene after scene, with different actors volunteering to step in. No one mentioned Greg. No one had to. Later, as everyone was gathering their things to leave, Paula approached Lily. "So what happens now?" she asked in a low voice, nodding toward Robert, who was deep in conversation with Tom about character motivation. "What do you mean?" Lily asked, though she knew exactly what Paula meant. "Come on, Lily. We all just saw it. He's amazing. Better than Greg has ever been in this role." Paula crossed her arms. "Are you really going to sideline him after that?" Lily watched Robert laugh at something Tom said, a full, genuine laugh she'd never heard from him before. "It's complicated." "It's really not," Paula countered. "One performance is safe and familiar. The other is something special." After everyone left, Robert helped Lily turn off the lights and lock up. They walked to their cars in comfortable silence, the night air cool against their skin. "Thank you," Robert said finally, stopping beside his car, "for not letting me give up." "Thank you for being brave enough to try again," Lily replied. Robert looked at her for a long moment. "Can I ask you something? Why did you really ask me to do the role in the first place?" "The truth." Lily considered making up something kind, but he deserved honesty. "It was impulsive. We needed someone, and you were there. I didn't expect anything to come of it." Robert nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I can't imagine anyone else in the role." She met his eyes directly. "You transformed it. Made it real in a way I didn't know was possible. Even though Greg's playing it now." "Yes," Lily said, then hesitated. "About that. The others were talking after you left." Robert's phone rang, interrupting her. He checked the screen and frowned. "It's my boss. I need to take this." Lily nodded, watching as he stepped away to answer. Whatever his boss was saying, it wasn't good news. Robert's shoulders tensed, his responses short. When he returned, his expression was troubled. "Everything okay?" Lily asked. "Not really," Robert sighed. "There's a problem with some major client accounts. I have to go in early tomorrow, stay late, probably through the weekend too." "The whole weekend, but the show opens on Monday night." "I know," Robert said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Maybe it's for the best. Clean break and all that." Lily felt a surge of frustration after everything that just happened in there. The way everyone responded to your performance. "It doesn't change anything," Robert said quietly. "Greg's still the lead. That's reality." "Reality can change," Lily insisted. "You've already changed it." Robert's smile was sad. "Some things don't change, Lily. Some people are leads, and some people," he shrugged, "some people are just background characters." Before Lily could respond, he got into his car and drove away, leaving her alone in the parking lot with words unsaid and decisions unmade. Opening night arrived with all the usual chaos. The community center buzzed with activity as volunteers arranged folding chairs, cast members applied makeup in the tiny bathroom, and Lily ran around solving last-minute problems. Only one thing was missing: Robert. True to his word, he hadn't shown up for the final weekend rehearsals. He hadn't responded to Lily's texts beyond a brief "good luck tonight" sent earlier that morning. She tried not to let her disappointment show as she checked the lighting cues one final time. 15 minutes to curtain," she announced, peeking into the makeshift dressing room where Greg was adjusting his costume in front of a small mirror. "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied with his trademark confidence. "Full house." "Just about," Lily confirmed. Nearly every seat was filled. Friends, family, and community members who faithfully attended each production. She'd even spotted the local newspaper reporter with his notepad. As she headed back to the lighting booth, Paula caught her arm. "Any word from Robert?" Lily shook her head. "He's got work stuff." Paula frowned. "That's what he's going with." "Really?" Before Lily could respond, there was a commotion near the entrance. The theater owner was speaking with a well-dressed older woman Lily didn't recognize. He spotted Lily and waved her over urgently. "Lily, this is Mrs. Chen," he said, his voice unusually deferential. "She's the Regional Arts Council Director." Apparently, she heard about our production and decided to drop in. Lily's stomach dropped. The Arts Council controlled grant funding for community theaters throughout the state. Their opinion could make or break their chances for the renovation money they desperately needed. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Lily managed to say. "I hope you enjoy the show." Mrs. Chen smiled politely. "I'm particularly interested in seeing Greg Thomas perform. I saw him in the college production of Hamlet years ago. Such promise." The theater owner shot Lily a meaningful look that clearly said, "Don't mess this up," before escorting Mrs. Chen to the best seat in the house. Back in the dressing room, Lily found Greg pacing nervously. "Mrs. Chen is here," she told him, "from the Arts Council." Greg's face paled slightly. "No pressure or anything," he muttered. The 5-minute call came, and the actors took their places. Lily climbed up to the lighting booth, her mind racing. Everything they'd worked for came down to tonight. Everything would be fine. Greg was a professional. He knew what he was doing. So why did she feel so hollow inside? The lights dimmed, and the audience fell silent. The opening scene began smoothly, the actors finding their rhythm as the story unfolded. Greg was solid, hitting his marks and delivering his lines with practiced precision. Yet something was missing, that raw emotional truth that Robert had brought to the role. Lily watched from above, going through the lighting cues automatically while her thoughts drifted to Robert. Was he still at the office? Or was he sitting alone in his apartment, wondering what might have been? The play approached the crucial monologue, the one where Robert had first revealed his true ability. Greg stepped forward, took his position, and began to speak. From the lighting booth, Lily noticed a movement at the back of the theater. The door had opened slightly, allowing a sliver of light from the hallway to slip in. A figure stood in the shadows, watching. Robert. Her heart jumped. He had come after all, even if just to watch. On stage, Greg continued the monologue, his voice rising dramatically at all the right moments. It was a good performance. Safe. Expected. Then something strange happened. Greg faltered. Just for a moment, but in the sudden silence, it felt longer. He looked out at the audience, then up toward the lighting booth where Lily sat frozen in place. "I'm sorry," he said, breaking character. "I can't do this." A confused murmur rippled through the audience. The other actors exchanged alarmed glances. From her seat in the front row, Mrs. Chen leaned forward with interest. Greg turned to face the back of the theater. "Robert," he called out. "I know you're back there." All heads turned. In the doorway, Robert looked like he wanted to disappear. "Come up here," Greg said. "What are you doing?" hissed one of the other actors. Greg ignored them. "Robert, please. Come up here." After what felt like an eternity, Robert slowly made his way down the aisle. He was wearing a suit, not a costume, but a real suit, like he'd come straight from work. He stopped at the edge of the stage, looking confused and embarrassed. "I heard you the other night," Greg said, his voice carrying through the silent theater. "When you didn't know I was there. I came back to get my script and heard you rehearsing with the others." Robert's eyes widened in surprise. "And the thing is," Greg continued, "you were better. Much better." He turned to face the audience. "This role isn't mine. It never really was." He extended his hand to Robert. "It's yours. It's always been yours." Robert stood frozen, looking from Greg to the audience to Lily in the booth. "But the show," Robert began. "Will be better with you in it," Greg finished. He addressed the audience directly. "Folks, I apologize for the interruption, but you're about to see something special. This man stepped in when I abandoned the production, and he found something in this character that I never could." He turned back to Robert. "Take your rightful place." The theater was so quiet you could hear the old heating system clicking in the walls. All eyes were on Robert as he stood at the crossroads of his old life and a new possibility. Slowly, his gaze traveled up to the lighting booth where Lily stood watching, her heart in her throat. She gave him the tiniest nod, their old signal. "I see you. I believe in you." Robert took a deep breath and climbed the steps to the stage. Greg handed him the suit jacket that was part of the costume. As Robert slipped it on over his own clothes, a transformation seemed to take place, not just in his appearance, but in his entire presence. "Pick up from the monologue," one of the actors whispered. Robert nodded and moved to the center of the stage. The audience waited, uncertain what to expect from this strange turn of events. When he began to speak, his voice was quiet but clear, building in strength with each word. This wasn't the practiced perfection of an experienced actor. This was something raw and real. A man stepping into his truth after a lifetime of hiding. By the middle of the monologue, you could have heard a pin drop in the theater. Even those who had seen the rehearsals were transfixed. Mrs. Chen sat forward in her seat, her notepad forgotten in her lap. As Robert reached the emotional peak of the speech, his eyes found Lily's across the distance. In that moment, something passed between them, a recognition that went beyond words. This moment, this courage, this transformation, they had created it together. The rest of the play unfolded like a dream. The other actors, energized by Robert's authenticity, gave their best performances. The audience responded with rapt attention, laughing and gasping at all the right moments. When the final scene ended and the lights came up, there was a moment of silence, that precious space between experience and reaction. Then the audience rose to their feet, applause thundering through the small theater. Robert stood center stage, looking stunned as flowers were brought out and the cast took their bows. Later, as the audience filed out, Mrs. Chen approached Lily with an unreadable expression. "That," she said simply, "was not what I expected." Lily braced herself. "I can explain the last-minute change." "No need," Mrs. Chen interrupted. "It was extraordinary. Raw, truthful, exactly what community theater should be." She handed Lily her card. "Call my office on Monday. I think we need to talk about that renovation grant you've been applying for." As the theater emptied, Lily found Robert sitting alone on the edge of the stage, still in his costume, looking both exhausted and alive. "You came," she said, sitting beside him. "I couldn't stay away," he admitted. "I was just going to watch from the back." "And instead you stole the show," Lily said with a smile. Robert laughed softly. "I guess I did." "So what happens now?" Lily asked. Robert looked out at the empty seats, considering. "I don't know. Go back to insurance forms tomorrow? Is that what you want?" He turned to face her. What I want? I think what I want is to stop hiding, to stop being afraid of being seen. He took her hand tentatively, and maybe to see where this goes. Us, I mean, if there is an us. Lily interlaced her fingers with his. There definitely is. They sat together in comfortable silence as the theater settled around them, the building creaking, the lights humming. What had started as a joke, a desperate last-minute solution, had become something neither of them had expected. A new role. A new beginning. A chance to step out of the background and into the spotlight of their own lives. Ready to go? Lily asked eventually. Robert nodded but made no move to leave, just giving myself a minute to remember this feeling. You don't have to, Lily said, squeezing his hand. There's always tomorrow night's show, and the night after that. And for the first time, Robert looked toward the future without fear. Beyond the stage, beyond this moment, was a life waiting to be lived. A life where he wouldn't be a background character anymore, but the lead in his own story. He was finally ready for his role.